On this Friday night, the mess and the misery from two tornadoes. People in Ontario and Quebec pick up the pieces.
Half of roofs has gone right.
How the nation's capital could be more vulnerable to violent weather. The struggle to find affordable housing.
We've got students who are living in their vehicles.
How the cost of rent has hit the roof. The buzz over the caffeine in prime energy drinks. Some advice to parents. Plus, we reality check the WHO's declaration on aspartame being possibly carcinogenic. And astronomical shift.
Who knows what's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years' time.
How humans' thirst for groundwater has knocked the Earth off its axis.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. A major cleanup is underway in parts of southern Ontario and Quebec tonight. Two tornadoes ripped through the region, one in Ottawa, the other just north of Montreal. Officials are tallying the damage, but it is extensive. Fierce winds tore siding off of homes and flash flooding swamped streets. The severe weather may have settled for now, but as Touria Izri reports, researchers say intense storm fronts are becoming more frequent and are shifting east.
Rebuilding will likely take weeks after a tornado lasting just seconds.
The entire roof is gone, just rafters are left. All the insulation was, ripped out of there.
A fierce storm rolled into Ottawa and ripped through a suburb in the city's southwest. This man was at home with his family when it struck.
Just screamed everybody to hit the basement. My daughter was up in her room at the time.
The tornado damaged more than 100 homes, tearing off the sides of houses, smashing windows, and sending shingles into the air.
It was so damaged inside. The roof from the half of roofs has gone right. So that's the big damage.
Construction crews are trying to make homes livable again.
This was actually really bad. Yeah, it wasn't your standard windstorm. So any house that has damage, for the most part, a lot of the plywood and insulation's actually been ripped off and blown out as well.
Downed trees are scattered on front yards across the neighborhood as city crews try to clean up the huge mess left behind. On the same day, a separate tornado slammed into a Montreal suburb. It wasn't wind, but water causing the bulk of the problems. Thunderstorms unleashed a month's worth of rainfall on the city in just 2 hours, stranding drivers and backing up sewers.
From this corner, we had to run up to our knees to get to our house.
The storm left thousands of people without power, flooded homes, businesses, even this shelter.
Sadly, the damage inside, we had 2 feet of water in our basement. And for us, what that means is just there's an awful lot of waste.
Tornadoes, flooding, and wildfires. This summer has been especially severe. Climate change and population growth are putting new pressures on Canadian cities.
There's more density, there's more stuff, then there are more impacts.
Another change, researchers say the National Capital Region is becoming a tornado alley.
Before, we were seeing that the peak tornado area was the southern part of Saskatchewan there, but we've been finding it's shifted eastwards.
And a shift in strategy may be what's needed to make cities more resilient as fierce storms become more frequent. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
A 19-year-old wildfire fighter has died in the line of duty in southeastern BC. Police say Devon Gale was working with a team clearing brush near Revelstoke. Members of her team lost contact with her and then found her caught under a fallen tree. The crew began first aid before she was airlifted to hospital, where she died. Revelstoke's mayor says the community is in shock.
Devastated. We think about anyone who's trying to protect our community, and whether there's an injury or, in this case, tragedy with loss of life is just devastating for all of us.
A number of agencies are now investigating Gale's death, including the RCMP and the BC Coroner's Service. In the United States, more than 90 million Americans were placed under some kind of heat advisory today as a relentless heat wave blankets more than a dozen states. Forecasters warn all-time records could be broken in the Southwest this weekend, with temperatures expected in the mid to high 40s. In Phoenix, Arizona, daytime temperatures have now remained above 43 degrees for 2 straight weeks, with little relief overnight. Conditions are also expected to intensify in the Northwest and much of the southern U.S. over the weekend. A judge has granted a temporary injunction to remove a blockade at the Brady Road landfill in Winnipeg. Protesters have until 6 o'clock tonight before police move in. The judge says they can stay at the site, but they can't block the road. The barricade was set up last week after the Manitoba government said it would not fund a search of the Prairie Green landfill for the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, 2 missing and murdered Indigenous women. 5 months ago, a terrifying scene unfolded at a shooting range in Langley, British Columbia. It ended with a police officer taking his own life. The horrifying incident followed a months-long investigation of the officer for breach of trust. Now, as Catherine Urquhart reports, court documents in the case have been unsealed by a judge.
In February, Surrey Police Service Constable Dilbag Dylan Hoti took his own life while at a shooting range in Langley. It happened as the former Mountie was facing a breach of trust charge following months of investigation into his behavior. Details of the investigation have been largely unknown as court documents were sealed. But now, following a court challenge by Global News, a judge has unsealed the search warrants and affidavits, allowing us to report why he was facing a criminal charge. Court documents reveal that in August 2022, a 15-year-old girl filed a report with Surrey RCMP saying she had met Hoti amid a search for her missing friend. She said she had identified herself to Hoti as being 15 years old and that after initial text messages, Hoti asked to transition to his personal cell phone. She said he asked her to meet with him late at night and had engaged in conversations about consuming alcohol, telling her he gets wild and horny when he drinks, and told her he wanted to meet at 10 to 10:30 p.m. and said they would play Truth or Dare in person, something she had initially suggested. The girl's cell phone data was extracted by investigators. 2 days later, Hoti was arrested, his 2 cell phones seized along with his notebook. His service revolver was also taken and he was suspended.
It was a breach of trust investigation that was being fronted by Surrey RCMP and was working its way through BC Prosecution Services.
Investigators haven't confirmed if Hoti was about to be charged criminally when he shot himself at the range. Search warrants are providing some insight, but many questions remain in connection with the case and the allegations, which remain unproven. Catherine Urquhart, Global News.
Interest rate hikes and new listings are said to have had a cooling effect on Canada's hot housing market last month, pushing the Real Estate Association to cut its home sales forecast for this year and next. The CREA says some 460,000 properties are forecast to trade hands in 2023. That's nearly a 7% decline from last year and much larger than the 1% decline the association predicted 3 months ago. The 2024 outlook was also lowered in the industry group's latest report. It's now expecting just over 510,000 home sales next year, a drop from the more than 560,000 previously predicted. Prices, however, aren't expected to fall anytime soon, as a lack of supply is still hampering several major markets across the country. It's not only affecting buyers, but renters who are struggling to find affordable housing options. This week saw yet another record high, with average asking rents in Canada hitting more than $2,040 a month, up more than 10% from last year. Heather Yourex-West reports.
International student Luis Sanchez is trying to refocus on his studies. It's been a difficult few weeks trying to find a place to live.
I started looking out outside of campus, and it was a really difficult task because the prices have gone up significantly over the past year.
Even with the addition of a roommate, the fourth-year political science student will be paying several $100s a month more. Still, he feels lucky to have found a place at all.
We've got students who are living in their vehicles temporarily, who have lived in their vehicles temporarily because they couldn't find a place to live. And that's just not okay in a place like Calgary.
Across the country, the situation is even more challenging. In June, the average rent for a one-bedroom in Calgary was $1,687, compared to over $2,500 in Toronto, or nearly $3,000 in Vancouver.
We need to increase the supply of housing.
In May, the Prime Minister told a conference of big city mayors that $4 billion in federal funding will be coming to help cities increase their housing supply. But with interest rates rising, advocates say vulnerable families need help now.
We have seen over the past year a doubling in calls for help from families, families telling us that they can no longer afford their rent or their mortgage, they're facing eviction.
Luis Sanchez is thinking of his future as well. Originally from Mexico, the student was hoping to stay in Canada after graduation. Now he and his classmates aren't so sure.
I really have heard stories of other students that are thinking of even moving to the United States after they graduate because the cost of living in terms of housing and overall life, it's cheaper than in many Canadian cities.
The weight of both an affordability and housing crisis, just too much to take. Heather, Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Escaping Russia's war. Coming up, time is running out for Ukrainians to apply to stay in Canada. Plus, why Ukraine wants a weapon other countries, including Canada, have banned. Canada's emergency visa program for Ukrainians fleeing the war is set to expire. Applications for expedited visas and temporary residency permits are closing Saturday. The federal government says it has helped tens of thousands of Ukrainians fleeing Russian aggression.
Even as we sunset this particular immigration program, which was a temporary program, Canada will continue to stand resolved behind Ukraine with our NATO allies.
More than 800,000 visas have been approved. Ukrainians have until March 31st, 2024 to arrive, and they can stay up to 3 years. It's unclear whether the government will offer long-term refuge. It appears Russian President Vladimir Putin is distancing himself from the private military group once so critical to his war on Ukraine. Putin says the Wagner group simply does not exist. Last month, it turned on Russia and staged a brief armed mutiny. It also has fought some of the bloodiest battles since the war began. More than 500 days into the invasion, Ukraine says it's making slow progress. As Crystal Gamansing reports, cluster munitions could help their counteroffensive.
It's the first image of Yevgeny Prigozhin since he led a mutiny heading towards Moscow. The post on the Telegram app says the Wagner head is in Belarus. The private mercenary group is training Belarusian soldiers, but it's likely they'll also keep fighting in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin told a Russian newspaper despite the revolt, he offered to let Wagner mercenaries continue fighting as long as Prigozhin wasn't involved. The Ukrainian president says at the moment there is no large-scale threat from Belarus and that full concentration is on the front. Ukrainians are trying to reclaim territory in the south and east, but Russians are said to be well protected in deep trenches surrounded by fencing and mines.
For the Ukrainians to gain any ground, to push the Russians back, they have to go through these incredible defenses that have been set up, 3, 4, 5, or 6 different lines.
That's where these come in. Cluster munitions could come into play. They're now in Ukraine's possession, courtesy of the U.S. Both Russia and Ukraine have used these rounds in the past. They hold lots of smaller explosives that are released midair and fan out. Some don't explode right away. More than 100 countries have banned them, including Canada, and the man who shepherded the 1996 Landmines Treaty is outraged.
Once you unleash the dogs of war, you're never sure where they're going to run to. Well, I think we've unleashed
this whole issue of using these terrible weapons.
In fighting off invading Russian forces, Ukraine has been using an estimated 8,000 rounds a day.
The United States are supplying those cluster munitions is that we collectively, the West, can't supply Ukraine with enough conventional artillery shells.
The way it could have been avoided is if Mr. Trudeau and other NATO leaders had grown the spine earlier to send Ukraine the muscle it needed.
And the grinding, protracted war isn't likely to end soon. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
New concerns about caffeine and aspartame ahead. Should you be changing your habits? It has been a busy week in health news. Late yesterday, the World Health Organization labeled aspartame as a possible carcinogen. On top of that, Canadian authorities have recalled several caffeine-filled energy drinks. Joining us now to help put this all into perspective is David Ma, professor of human health and nutritional sciences at the University of Guelph. So first of all, can you give us some context around the WHO's report on aspartame and the recommendations?
Thank you for having me. So the WHO report basically tells us that in terms of the hazard of aspartame being linked to cancer, there is limited evidence and it's not convincing. And the second aspect of the report assesses risk, and their assessment of risk is that it remains at a very, very low level. So the take-home message is that if you drink diet soft drinks, you can have 1 or 2 a day, because there's a wide safety limit in that you can consume 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, and that relates to about 15 cans of diet drinks per day. So there's a wide range of safety built into the recommendation.
Okay, let's go into energy drinks. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is recalling several of them over caffeine levels, including Prime Energy. What's your reaction to the Prime Energy drinks being banned and your advice to parents?
I think this is a prudent move by Health Canada to look at the recall of these energy drinks. They far exceed current recommendations in terms of caffeine intake in adults and children. The energy drinks, to my knowledge, contain up to about 200 milligrams per beverage, and in terms of children, they can be consuming safely up to about 100, 150 milligrams. And so the drinks themselves may cause potential harm and lead to dizziness, convulsion, and maybe a trip to the emergency room if consumed in excess.
What are some healthier alternatives to energy drinks?
Great question. So Health Canada has the Canada's Food Guide, and its recommendation is to choose water as the beverage of choice. A second recommendation is simply to cut back on the consumption of these energy drinks. There are also other fun choices as well. Carbonated drinks with natural flavoring, and then also milk, which is high in calcium and vitamin D, good for the bone, and we get our sunshine vitamin, and 100% orange juice, not from concentrate. So there are definitely some fun options out there for parents to choose.
So we talk about healthier alternatives, back to the other end of the spectrum, and aspartame, which is again listed as a possible carcinogen. Do you think there are other foods and drinks more concerning and overlooked, like red meat or alcohol?
So, very good question. So that relates to the level of hazard, and alcohol and is certainly on the upper end of that spectrum, much more so than aspartame. A very good message to convey is that we should think about the whole diet. Are we getting enough fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean meats, and other lifestyle factors such as physical activity and sleep as part of a healthy lifestyle. And then above all else, have fun and enjoy eating food.
That is great advice. David Ma from the University of Guelph, thank you very much. Putting a new spin on things. Next, how humans are altering the Earth's axis.
3, 2, 1, 0.
And with that, India seeks to advance its position as a major player in space. This rocket is headed to the moon's south pole. It's expected to arrive next month. If the mission succeeds, the rocket would be the first to land at the lunar south pole, which is of special interest to space agencies due to the presence of ice that could support a future space station. Back here on Earth, there's new research into the incredible and unexpected impacts humans are having on the planet. Scientists have discovered Earth's tilt is actually shifting because of the huge amount of water being used for farming and drinking. As Jackson Prosco explains, the planet's wandering axis could have unintended consequences.
These days, our world is a little off kilter, thanks to our insatiable thirst for water, pumped from sources deep underground.
If you move water around on the planet from one location to another, you change its angular momentum.
Humans have extracted trillions of tons of groundwater for farming and drinking. So much water that scientists say it has shifted the tilt of the entire planet, moving the rotation axis, or North Pole.
Although we can't see the axis, the Earth still turns or rotates around it.
When groundwater is pumped and used at the surface, it eventually finds its way into the oceans, adding to sea level rise. And as the planet spins at 1,600 kilometers per hour, all that extra water sloshes around in its new location. It weighs so much that it is shifting Earth's axis at a rate of 4.36 centimeters per year. Like an overloaded washing machine, the planet is wobbling.
I think the lesson for us is that we have to be more proactive than reactive and try to minimize the human footprint on the Earth, because who knows what's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years' time.
Though the axis has been known to move slightly with the seasons, the man-made shift has only recently been understood.
But everybody that uses navigation systems like the Global Positioning System, it's essential to know exactly where that rotation axis is.
And as the planet keeps on spinning, it's sending warning signs about our use of limited groundwater. Climate change is adding to the tilt by melting glaciers and ice caps, raising sea levels further.
There is deep uncertainty on how we are impacting the Earth system.
No one expects the wobble to have a drastic impact on the seasons or our long trip around the sun, but in watching the world turn, scientists have tapped into a better understanding of our incredible impact on the planet. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Interesting. That is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Neetu Garsha. Tonight's Your Canada is this fawn and doe in Winnipeg's Assiniboine Forest. We love seeing your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great weekend.